Hello and very, very welcome to this Google Hangout show where we have conversations about the things we usually don't speak about. My name is Maria Appelqvist and I'm your host for these shows. And today I have Carrie Howard here in the studio as a guest with me. Welcome, Carrie.
Thanks, Maria.
So I'm very excited to have Carrie here. She is Miss Pink herself. I met Carrie, how many years ago is it now? 4 years ago? I think it's 4 years. We met We met on a train from Los Angeles to California. And I've been many times in California, but this was the first time ever I took the train. And we met and we connected and we found we had so many similarities. We were doing about the same things in life with coaching. And she's an experienced psychologist living in Australia. And we just connected and we had a beautiful day where we were hanging out and doing a lot of shopping together, which is part of finding the luxuries in life. And then we have catch up again because we have been to the same journey together with Entrepreneurial Institute and doing a long month program in Bali. So Carrie, I'm super happy to have you here and very curious to learn more about what it means to find your inner diva.
So my website, which you can see on the bottom here, is actually where I talk about defining your inner diva. And I really have this passion to work with women who often end up sort of in their midlife thinking, is this it? Is this all life actually is for me? And trying to understand whether or not there's something more that they could get out of their life. You know, they often don't feel very happy within themselves and they're not quite sure why. They seem to have achieved all of their life milestones in terms of career, but maybe not necessarily some of the other areas in life, or maybe they did go ahead and have family and get married, but maybe they end up divorced and they just, their life hasn't quite turned out the way that they thought it would have, or perhaps even it did turn out the way that they thought it would and that didn't make them happy. And I think a huge part of that is kind of trying to then understand ourselves as women. I think modern women, particularly women of our generation, you know, the Gen Xers, I think we were raised in a society that said we could have it all. You could have your career and family and do everything and, you know, your life would be wonderful. I think what we learnt as a collective group of women is that, yeah, we could have it all, but actually in having it all made life quite challenging and a little bit difficult and perhaps still didn't give us everything or the sense of fulfillment that we actually were seeking in life. So defining your inner diva is really about looking at all 6 aspects of your life, your sense of self, which I call delightful diva, relationships, which is actually broken up into 2 parts. So I have a program called Divorce Diva. Divorce Diva is looking at if you're coming out of a relationship, what you need to have a look at in consideration of where you might be in terms of how you feel about yourself at that point in time. Then there's Delectable Diva, which is when you think you're ready for another relationship or you think you might be looking for one. I always say to people, think you're ready for another relationship, think again. There's a few things that you probably need to work through for yourself before you embark on another one. Then we look at Divine Diva, which is looking at the sort of health and wellbeing areas, but primarily that program is about weight loss and understanding the psychological barriers to weight loss. And I don't come at this from somebody who's never had a weight issue. I actually used to be a whole lot bigger than I am now, and had to sort of understand my own thinking and understand my relationship with food from a psychological perspective before I could change all of that. Then I talk about Decisive Diva, which is looking at your career and where you're at in terms of your success in life. Often we look to our careers to make us feel any positive sense of self. So if we stop and think about how your sense of self is made up and your belief system, your negative belief system is all about your, sense of who you are. invariably your positive belief system rests on what you do. And it really shouldn't, but it ends up, for most people it does, especially by their midlife. That's really how they define themselves. Then I talk about looking at your finances. So as women, particularly women like myself who are, you know, in their sort of mid years, 40 plus, and find themselves, you know, looking after their own situation financially, you know, what sort of challenges does that bring for you as a single woman, needing to kind of, you know, look after her things like a mortgage and buying your own home and doing all those sorts of things, and looking at your own future and how you kind of make sure that you take care of yourself from a financial perspective going forward. And then the last program is Dharma Diva, and this is actually looking at your sense of self in terms of your spiritual connection. Because regardless of what, you know, religious background or belief you actually have, most women have some sense of connection to self. And we often talk about women being intuitive. Modern society, particularly Western society, teaches us not to actually engage with our intuitive self. And often the things that we know about ourselves, or there's a sense that we'll get about a particular issue, and we often then downplay it, and we're too afraid to actually go with what we feel in our gut. And so I often talk to people about our sense of connection, and trusting the intuition, particularly around your sense of self. But when you stop and think about the spiritual, it's also about that idea that we connect to each other on a very sort of strong level. And as women, particularly women who, in a more modern society, and as we've got younger women, I've got daughters, and as women we need to actually connect with each other and nurture each other to sort of build a much stronger, accepting society, and support other women. And, you know, the way that I see it, stop trying to bring huge amounts of masculine qualities to what, you know, to who we are as women, to feel that that's what we need to do to move forward in life, but to embrace our feminine and to be able to sit within that power and be able to move forward.
Yeah.
So that's what I think is defining your inner diva. I see divas as being a really beautiful manifestation of womanhood within ourselves. And that's why I call myself the definitive diva. You know, I'm not perfect. I'm not there yet. I think we all learn as we go through life, and it's a constantly evolving process.
It's true. Yeah, it's really true. And I love this holistic viewpoint of seeing how, like, we just can't cut out one piece of the part of our lives, but it actually goes whole together. So I love how you have created this whole program, and like you're saying yourself also, is that we usually we're working on the areas in our lives where we ourselves needs to improve. But I'm curious, because I was having a discussion with someone yesterday about all the things I'm doing as well, which is also connected to the feminine. And it's just what comes to me, and I think this is really what you're about, in what you're doing with helping women finding their inner diva and bringing together a society with it, is we as women, and I think it's probably the same for men, we don't have any role models. We don't have any kind of conversations about what it means to expand in your feminine. And nobody never taught us, not our mothers and not in our society. There is a lot of taboos even to say that you're supportive of the feminine. So living in Sweden and being one of the most gender neutral countries in the world, there is also a kind of a official denial of bringing out your gender. So I'm curious how you see that, and how it is in Australia in relationship, because I'm seeing that there is a lack in our society of having this kind of conversation.
Yeah, I can understand. I think definitely in Australia we probably have more gender stereotypical kind of diverse ends of the spectrum maybe than some other countries, and from what you're saying within Sweden. And I visited some of those the Nordic countries, Finland, and I think it's much the same in your part of the world. In our part of the world, we've grown up in a society in which men are men, and women, very different perspectives on roles, and I think even though we've tried to change that, certainly over the course of my generation, it's been a little bit different. And we were probably lucky enough in the 1970s to have a fairly progressive Prime Minister who brought in a whole bunch of social support changes. So in my case, even though you say your mother didn't teach you those sort of values, I think my mother did. And I think she did it not because that's what she wanted to do, but almost because she was forced into it. So just to give you a bit of background, so I'm the youngest of 5 children. I'm one of 2 daughters, and there's my sister's the eldest, and then I'm the youngest, and 3 boys in the middle. My dad left when I was 15 months old, and my mum was basically left to raise us on her own. And it was a very different society then. But in Australia, we were lucky enough for her to be able to get, although it took the first year, she didn't know. A year later, she was able to actually get some level of welfare support. So her dependence on my father to kind of take care of us, which he wasn't doing, was really kind of then taken away from him and given more power to her directly, especially in terms of her own finances. And then there were some other social reforms in Australia around that time. This was in the early 1970s when Gough Whitlam was Prime Minister. And he really made it, they sent my mother a letter in about 1974 that said, we're going to give you an aptitude test, and if you're clever enough, we're going to allow you to go to university, and we're going to pay. And that really changed life for us as I see it. My belief and value in education is absolutely tied to my mother, because then what happened was she sat an aptitude test. My father had her convinced all of her life that she was stupid and couldn't actually do anything more than work in a factory. And the university, she was given a letter from the government saying, you can go to university. You're really smart and we're going to pay.
Wow.
So that single moment really turned my whole life around. And it's one of those things that I look at that moment and I think that's why I was given an opportunity to do things very differently. I'm a very big believer in social support systems that support women to be independent of men if they need to be. And as women, we can't help it. We nurture children, we bear them in our bodies, and then we raise them. And sometimes, for varying reasons, a family network breaks down. Those women and our society need to be valued to actually raise those children up and give those women a sense of validity of themselves within that process. And I feel very privileged to live in a country that supports women to do that. And as a result, it's really interesting because there's a big age gap between me and my older brothers and sisters, my sister. But I'm the only one of my family who went to university, but I didn't go until mature age. But because my learning about what was important was that with education, I can improve my life. Without education, I'm really not going to get there. And I don't mean formal education. This is why I do what I do and why I love it so much now, is because I feel like I'm passing on education to more women out there. And if you're prepared to listen, you know, there's lots of tidbits. And I'm also continually learning from the women that I connect with. And that is the real joy of life, I think, is that sense of continuous improvement process. And that's actually what I love to do and why I love to connect with people like you, Maria. I mean, that day on the train was amazing. And we spent lots of time around. We were in San Francisco, and it's just a beautiful place of the world. Like, I just love it. You know?
It's super. And it's there. What you're actually speaking about is the power of connection and what it means to really connect to another human being. And I think that is also something that we are missing in our societies, and in particular with an increased technology and other modes of communication, it's almost like an art skill to learn how to connect and communicate with others. So I think the connection we had on that journey, being on that train, it created a base. And this is what happens when connection, like true connection really happens, is it doesn't matter. You're in a way connected, and then you can catch up 4 years later or 5 years later, but it's still like connection is really it's been there, right? Without that connection, it wouldn't have been natural.
No. And I think a huge part of that, though, is honestly about making yourself open to a level of connection. And I talk about this in a lot of my relationship discussions, that the benefit really is about opening yourself to that connection. Now, to do that, you actually have to allow yourself to be vulnerable. You have to allow yourself to actually potentially open yourself up truly, but maybe, just maybe, the person that you're connecting yourself to may at some point in the future hurt you. And that's hard. A lot of people will avoid connection, will kind of keep themselves back away from any connection because they don't want to be hurt, because in previous connections, somebody's hurt them. But in reality, what we also know is that if we don't open ourselves up to connection, we leave ourselves very isolated and withdrawn. And that does not make us feel like we're living wholeheartedly, and we definitely don't feel good about ourselves in that space.
Yeah.
So as painful as it can be, it's better to connect and deal with the pain as it goes, and be happy about the fact that at least for that period of time, we enjoyed the company of the other and it brought us joy, and knowing that life is full of those ebbs and flows. And that then, you know, people come into your life for a reason or a season. You know, we talk about that. Sometimes they're there to teach us something. But if we hold ourselves back from connection, we never get the opportunity.
I think you're right. And I think which is much of my teaching, is to see that we have both the masculine and feminine in us. And I think the feminine is really about that connection and that openness. And I used to be that overdriven woman, really powerful in my masculine energy. And I didn't really see that I had a problem with connection, which I probably had at that time. But basically, and this is, like you're saying, what I learned during the years is that we all have in some way experiences of being hurt in love. And it's so extremely vulnerable to open up that connection, that part of yourself that are willing and ready to connect again. And that comes from a very feminine place in you, irrespective if you're a man or a woman, I think. So it's super.
I think too, it's a little bit regardless of whether or not the connection is an intimate one or just at a friendship level. I think we often underestimate the impact in terms of, you know, we think about these connections in terms of making ourselves vulnerable in an intimate connection. But often it's just the friendships that we kind of, you know, develop in life too, or the business acquaintances or the work associates that we kind of come across. And we often kind of hold ourselves back from being too close to them because, you know, there's a fear around what they may want from us or what they may take from us. And I often think that that's a really unfortunate thing, because if you can live life much more wholeheartedly and open, your connections with other people are just fabulous. And if you're okay with the fact that you're good with who you are, then there's a big difference between if somebody comes into your life for a period and then they leave again, you can kind of just recognize that they must have been there for a particular purpose, whether it was for your purpose or theirs. But just allow it to be what it is and enjoy the connection for that period. I mean, if we think back to you and I on the train, we had a great connection there. But if it wasn't for things like Facebook and, you know, the diversity of World Wide Web these days, I mean, we wouldn't be able to keep that connection. And, you know, having a conversation today, which is great.
Oh, that's super cool. So we are really happy for the new technology also that makes it possible to connect and stay connected, and you can actually that's wonderful. I'm curious how like the finding your inner diva, and do you think, is this a Western phenomenon, or is this something that is for women in general. I'm sensing that there is something in particular for Western women to learn when it comes to finding their inner diva. But do you have any?
I think I've been thinking about this a little bit more. I've actually got a couple of clients who come from more sort of Eastern backgrounds, particularly, you know, Chinese, Malaysian, Singaporean kind of countries that have, think of China. China's very driven in terms of their focus on career and being, if we think about Asian countries in general, very defined about who they are in, like what they do in the world, rather than that sort of sense of self-acceptance about, you know, who they are in general. So I think there's applicability to what I talk about that goes across all cultures. But one of the things that I think is very different between Eastern and West is their sense of spiritual connection. And when you were in Bali, you would have probably noticed the same thing that I did. I don't know what Sweden's like in terms of the connection to the spiritual, but in Australia, we're very pretty blasé really about anything to do with any level of spirituality or you know, any level of religious background or connection. And we're a very diverse society. We have many, many people here from many different cultures. And I did a blog about spirituality probably about a month ago now. And I was talking about the fact that in Australia, we seem to be, because we're such a diverse group of people who have been displaced from other areas within the world. So we look at our ancestral trail, and even within our own Indigenous culture, we displaced the Indigenous members of our community, and in turn, we've come from other places, and so we are also quite displaced. But for whatever reason, unlike what happened in America where they were sort of displaced, but what they did was kind of brought this sense of religious connection or basis with them and built it up within the whole society. In Australia, we don't seem to have done that or imbibed it across the whole society in the same way. And I find that it's that component of it that makes some of the issues around how we view our sense of self quite different in Western societies, certainly within Australia, than it is in some other countries. But even in countries like America, where their sense of connection to a religious component appears to be very strong, I don't think it is embedded within the system as it is in some of the Eastern cultures. And what I mean by that is it doesn't have the sense of acceptance of self that comes with some of the more Eastern philosophies. So I think about, I was talking in the blog that I did a couple of weeks ago about the similarities between ancient Chinese culture and ancient Indian culture in terms of the 4 areas of life that they see as important. And they basically look at things like your birth, when you were born, so your astrological chart and what that defines about who you are. They look at your medical sort of basis within your body, what you feed your body in order to make it healthy. They look at exercise and how you move in order to keep your body fit and healthy and supple and free from pain. And they also then look at the order of things. So where things are placed in the world, how we place, even, you know, how we plant things and how we sort of place things in the world. And those 4 areas are really kind of interesting, that these ancient cultures have those 4 areas together that were the same, even though as cultures they were quite sort of separate. I think in Western society we don't hold the same sort of focus on those things that are important. Those ancient societies still focus on the individual as an individual, and the fact that the life system is what needs to be maintained, and from that comes this, you know, achievement or sense of self, and that the real focus in life is this sense of enlightenment or connection. Whereas in Western society, I think we're so disconnected from that we don't actually hold it in the same value. So then the value, rather than being internal, which is in Eastern society, is very much built in the external. And that's a big problem, because then we start looking at, well, how do we look and how do we present ourselves to the world? What do we achieve? So what does society say we are? And it's that externalization of our sense of self that makes it why we now have really high levels of depression, anxiety, and, you know, not feeling so good about ourselves because we don't value the person that we are inside, not in the same.
And being your psychological experience, I'm sure that you have met that so many times. And I think that's basically also what I found with my own coaching clients, and is that, you know, even though on the outside you look successful, but deep inside it's that void and you can't even articulate it, but it's basically about disconnection from yourself and that loss of connection.
And that's the big part of the reason. So I'm writing my book at the moment, and the first chapter I start with is about Delightful Diva, because you have to understand yourself. You have to be clear on what it is that drives how you feel about yourself, and get underneath it to the basis of it and work through those issues and come to a true, and not just a lip service kind of reflection of yourself, but a true acceptance and love for yourself. You know, warts and all, no matter who you are or what you've done in life, you can't change the past. You can only actually hold a really loose kind of map of where you see yourself in the future, but it's actually within yourself at this point in time. If you really have a great acceptance of yourself, you can accept everybody around you. You can do it without judgment. My vlog this week, which I'm about to put up, is actually about judgment and why we judge others.
Yes.
And it's really interesting. But I think if we can get a clearer picture about it, things are just going to be beautiful, I think, going forward. I'm so looking forward to the next 20 years, you know. I think our society as women is going to change so much.
Yeah, it is. We are in the change of building a whole new consciousness, and this is really what I'm representing also, and that's why I'm continuing having this kind of conversations. Finding yourself is also important for finding yourself as a leader in your business, which is a whole different conversations we could open up for. But it's really finding yourself, finding your inner diva, finding your feminine, finding your goal and your path in your life. It's part of being alive. So thank you, Carrie, for being here with your wisdom. And how do people find you? They go to your website, or?
You can go to my website, which is MsPinkHerself.com, or you can find me on Facebook. If you search for Ms. Pink Herself, you'll find my page on Facebook, and you can like the page. Every time I put my vlogs up, I always put them out through Facebook, or there's a blog page on the website. You can become a subscriber to the website, and then you get sent links to the vlogs as they go up. I'm trying really hard to do those every week. My computer system's challenging at the moment. I moved. It's really funny. In April, I bought myself. So I downsized. So my daughters have grown up and they moved out of home, and I downsized from the big 5-bedroom family home on this enormous block of land down to a little cottage. Just me and the puppy dogs. And what's interesting about that is that I've moved into this very old for where I live anyway, 1948 house. And the internet here is a little challenging, to say the least. And every time I try and upload videos and stuff, the system crashes. And I just think it's the technology stuff in this world that it's the challenges, but also it makes it beautiful when we can connect this way. I love that you're in Sweden late at night and I'm here in Australia in the early morning, and we can have this beautiful conversation and share it with a bunch of gorgeous girls online. I just think that's awesome. Yes. And it actually makes me feel really good, because there's this sense of, you know, achievement, being able to kind of put this information out there. And if we can just inspire one woman today to take a different step in her life and move forward so that she can actually create a better life for herself in the future, I just think we've done a great job.
I think so too. And I know you're doing a great job. I love your amusing stories. So go to Miss Pink herself website for learning more about what Carrie is doing. Thank you very much for having being here in your early Australian morning time. I'm super happy. And with that, thank you for watching and see you another time. Bye-bye.
See ya.